Welcome to Ithaca Politics, a series of shows that looks at the political life of Ithaca, New York. In this episode, we take a look back at the recent local election for council members and the mayor of Ithaca. Joining us is Matt Dougherty from the Ithaca Times, Celia Clarke from WRFI, and Ginny Jordan from the Ithaca Voice. I do not recall a time when a local election brought out so many candidates for common council, particularly young people. Any thoughts on why we had such an expansive field of candidates? Matt, would you like to start?
Well, this election was, for the first time in 10 years, every seat on Common Council and the mayor's office was up for re-election. So it was definitely a big year in local politics, attracted a lot of public attention. There were some big issues ranging from homelessness to crime to Cornell's MOU leading up to the day of election that really just, public support was really just, it turned out for those issues.
Would you agree, Jimmy, that the issues really kind of drove this election, drove the interest, at least among the candidate pool?
You know, it's hard to say. I do think that, especially the MOU, that drew a lot of people out. I think the city renegotiating its agreement with Cornell University to contribute more tax dollars. That's an issue that touches everybody. It's something that everybody wants to speak on. But, as far as that making people run for office, for me, I am not sure why exactly, but we have definitely seen a lot of young people take interest in running for common council. Three people are guaranteed to be on this new common council in their 20s, and potentially a fourth person in one of the races that's a little too close to call. That's all I would have to add.
Do you have any thoughts, Celia, about this?
I really wonder if it has to do in part with the Reimagining Public Safety plan that's going to be sort of implemented and taking form in the next few years. It's sort of just been planning stages from now, but from this election for this council and this administration with the new, whoever it is, new police chief, I think that might have had something to do with it, especially in terms of the development of the solidarity slate, maybe.
Just in general, I find it interesting how Ithaca, the city of Ithaca, is a very liberal town. In September, I wrote an article about the two Republican candidates in these local elections, Janice Kelly for mayor, Zach Wynn for council. And, I tried to figure out how many registered Republicans there are in town. 6% of registered voters are Republicans. And so the Democratic primary has been the de facto election in a lot of races over the years for a long time. And it's just interesting to see the number of races that went into the generals from the primaries, people who were competing for the Democratic nomination who then continued their campaign as an independent. We saw Cynthia Brock do that. We saw Jason Houfton do that. We saw Margaret Fabrizio do that, whose opponent...
Cross-endorsed.
Whose Margaret Fabrizio's opponent did end up, while remaining on the ballot, not running a general campaign, although that wasn't really clear until, the lead up to the general election.
And also the addition of Pat Sewell,
right.
who very openly said that he ran because he felt that people should have a choice, that people shouldn't be running uncontested. And so he joined in the third ward to provide opposition and a little bit of differing opinion on some things.
To me, Republicans have a long road to go. Conservatives in general have a long road to go if they want to make inroads in local politics here. So it seems to me that the Working Families Party, this third party that is to the left of the Democratic Party, definitely positions itself there, seems to have a much healthier foothold in local politics now. And one thing I'm curious to see is how far their reach will go. And will we see more local elections in the city of Ithaca head to a general between an independent and a Democrat, or a Working Families Party endorsed candidate and a Democrat? Because the thing for those two parties, what they would worry about is spoiling an election and then allowing someone to the right getting in office, and that's an explicit event that the Working Families Party openly talks about wanting to avoid. But that's not really a concern here in the city of Ithaca.
The fourth ward, the write-in campaign, proved very surprising.
Absolutely. I would call that the biggest surprise of the election. Jorge Defendini, a member of the Solidarity slate, represents the fourth ward and appeared unchallenged until the night of the election. I believe I was the one to break the news with the not to
You
brag.
were.
Yeah, on Twitter, I was out at the polls talking to voters, and I came across somebody who was giving out a piece of paper that had a sample ballot on it, instructing people on how to fill out their ballot to put the name Patrick Kuehler down instead of Jorge Defendini's, and it came as a surprise.
Do we know the pronunciation of his name?
Sorry, I said Patrick Kuehler, Patrick Kuehl.
Okay.
And he is the president of the Cornell Student Assembly. And so, he ran, I guess you would call it a surprise campaign. He didn't issue press releases. He didn't try to contact the media leading up to it. And, as an observer, to me, that feels very strategic. The fourth ward has very low voter turnout. Jorge ended up ranking up 28 votes in the unofficial results, and there are 12 write-ins. We don't know exactly for who, but Patrick Kuehl is who we think a lot of those might be going to. And there's at least 38 ballots that still need to be counted. So that could really, affidavit ballots, and so that could really change the balance right now. And I really can't stress enough, to me, the low voter turnout is what makes this write-in strategy at all possible. I mean, the fourth ward is predominantly students. It's up in College Town. Every ward has about 6,300, 6,400 people living in there. And for the incumbent to only score 28 votes in the unofficial results really shows you how little engagement typically is and that's not that unusual, that kind of low number, but it shows you how little engagement there typically is there. And there's just a lot of people that aren't registered to vote in Ithaca that are going to Cornell. So they're not that explains why that number is so low.
Yeah, and I definitely thought it was interesting seeing that the one statement that, how do you pronounce Patrick's last name?
Kuehl.
Kuehl? Okay, so the one statement that Patrick Kuehl did make to the media, he was talking about how he was inspired to run after a group of people came to him criticizing the Solidarity slate. So I just thought it was interesting to see that the surprise campaign was specifically targeted at one of the few openly Democratic Socialist members of City Council.
Do you think the argument has merit that he should have been campaigning a little bit more openly, that this write-in was a little bit manipulative? I believe Jorge brought out that argument, and I think Duxon said somewhat the same thing on his Twitter post. Celia?
Duxon, the alderperson Duxon, right?
Right, yep. Alderperson Duxon, yep.
I think the fundamental purpose of democratic little d elections is that we have time that the voters are allowed to vet candidates and make a decision. And so while this is certainly something that the rules of electioneering allow for, it does sort of defeat the purpose, I think, of allowing. I mean, it's very possible that you could have someone end up on Common Council representing a fifth, there are 5 wards, so representing kind of a fifth of the city, who are not, who is has not been vetted, who people don't know what their opinions are and where they stand or why they even want to be running for council or would want to be on council. So I think, in terms of how democracy works and the fact that this is how he chose to enter into an election,
really into the public eye.
yeah, maybe sort of raises some questions about, what he really thinks about the process and common council overall in the city. I mean, this is a city of real people who have real issues and problems, and it's, I think it's something that's worth questioning him about. And that he owes residents of the ward and residents of the city some answers, which
I will add, I mean, what Patrick Huell has come out and said is that he did do door knocking. Supposedly I did it for about a month and was talking to residents. And if we take him at his word, that is significant. That means something. But the fact that it was not an announced campaign, and that this was done under, the cover of night, not to be too dramatic. I think catching the larger city off guard like this, the blowback, it was predictable. And, I'm very interested to talk to him.
But, we also have a responsibility. Like, the media is sort of the fourth estate. We have an oversight responsibility and a responsibility to voters to do additional work around finding out about candidates and letting them know, whether it's by them coming on and answering questions, which is something we did at WRFI. We tried to invite all of the candidates to come on we did get everyone who was running during the primary process, and then again before the general election. Everyone else has done extensive profiles and questioning them, and I think that is as much part of, League of Women Voters had a thing, where everybody was sort of in a room. So I think that, that aspect of it is not something I would just dismiss. You might do some door knocking, but you might not be doing, you're not doing it for months the way that other people were, and you're not sort of facing, say, a forum of questions from voters who might not have anything to do or know anything about you. So,
yeah, there are many avenues that are available for people who are running for local office to make their voices heard to the public. So the fact that he didn't really take any of them, I think it shows that it was a concerted effort to kind of keep the write-in campaign secret until the last possible second.
Ward 1, Cynthia Brock, the longtime Democratic incumbent, lost the primary and then lost the general election running on an independent line. So I'd like to get all of your opinions, maybe starting with you, Celia. What actually happened here?
I was thinking about this the other day. I think by her own admission, when Cynthia Brock made the announcement that she was going to stay in the race for the general election, she talked about sort of being surprised that she talked about being surprised by the amount of outside support and outside help that Kayla Matos got. And that was because mainly being part of the Solidarity slate, being part of the Working Families Party endorsement, or getting that endorsement, I think. I think this was a time, I think that might have been, I have a feeling it had to do with having outside support and that being something in terms of rallying voters, of getting the word out about Kayla Matos's candidacy. I would think that that has something to do with it. And also the fact that incumbents kind of are used to campaigning in a certain way and doing certain things, and that just wasn't going to work for Cynthia this time when she had an opponent who had a lot of support and a bit of a political machine backing her that has some statewide recognition.
Well, I could understand that for the primary, but then looking to the general election, where she sort of knew what was coming. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I definitely think when Cynthia positioned herself as an independent, she probably tried to go after more of the vote that was concerned with crime coming from the jungle out of Nate's Floral Estates. And that's like a pretty important segment for her in the first ward. But I think Kayla Matos was really helped by like her legacy in Southside with the Southside Community Center. And I think that community really showed up in big numbers for her and pushed her over the top in that race.
Do you have any thoughts then, Jimmy?
I would agree with Matt. I think Kayla Matos was, her job as the deputy director of the Southside Community Center puts her in touch with a lot of people. She's personable, everybody knows her, and she's lived in Ithaca her whole life. Having the support of organizers associated with the Solidarity Slate, with the Working Families Party, I think those two factors, that long-time residency and that extra organizing strength, was a really potent mixture. Cynthia Brock, to her credit too, she's been on council for, this is her 12th year, and she has lots of allies. But it's interesting to see how effective in the primaries and surprising it was for the incumbent to see Matos win. But how that support held out into the general. It didn't just dissipate.
Yeah.
And I think that shows that Ithaca is interested in moving in a more progressive direction, and the public isn't going to fall for narratives around rising crime and the solution of that being increasing policing. I think that this is really going to help. Having more progressives on Common Council is going to help move the reimagining effort forward with less opposition.
A fair amount of attention is being paid to the crime issue around Ithaca, and I think that was a driving force for the Republicans to run as well. Did this issue not really get the traction that we expected? What do you think, Jimmy?
With crime, I haven't seen a study that says whether or not it's up. It has certainly been a narrative, and there is heightened concern. I mean, there have been some very high-profile incidents, right? Thomas Rath was a man living in the jungle who was kidnapped and murdered earlier this year, and that has led to, I believe, a dozen or more arrests.
So far.
So far.
We keep hearing so far.
So far. State police got involved, and when you bring up crime, a lot of people's first thought is the jungle, whether that's fair or not. And so, the first ward where Kayla Matos and Cynthia Brock were running to represent, that's where the jungle is. And so that's where the highest concentration and highest level of concern among voters is for crime around the jungle. And it's interesting too to see how, there was a lot of overlap in opinion and view between Cynthia Brock and Kayla Matos, but there's also, I think, some important philosophical differences. And to see voters still pick Kayla, it was a close race, but to see voters still pick Kayla was, I don't want to read too much into it because, again, it's a fairly close race, but given the environment, it was a powerful statement from the constituents there.
The statement being?
Support for this candidate and their views. I mean, for one, Kayla Matos on the campaign trail was, vocally opposed to any police involvement in enforcing who is camping where, and she definitely put that message out hard on the campaign trail, and that means something. That's a very strong philosophical difference to emphasize. Where Cynthia Brock would say something along the lines of, I think there are some instances where we should really allow or think that we need to have police going into the jungle and working there and doing their jobs there,
Yeah.
and to feel supported doing
Right,
that.
or accompanying first responder, others,
Yeah, which they do.
because that's
Yeah.
a concern for, I mean, that came up in the midst of all of this, too.
Exactly. I think given the choice between Kayla and Cynthia, it's clear to see that Kayla is the more progressive candidate when it came to that issue. I remember hearing Kayla talk about the root causes of crime being poverty several times, and about how the answer to a perceived increase of crime, a real increase of crime, it's not increasing police presence, it's addressing the root causes of crime, like
Right.
poverty. And I think that stance is really, it's obvious to voters, and they know who to choose.
Okay. So, Celia, again with Kayla, it appears that the vote totals weren't that far apart. So, in terms of her candidacy and her representation, how difficult is it for a candidate to win the trust of those people in her ward that didn't vote for her, that may not see eye to eye on the issues?
Well, I think in the case of Kayla and Cynthia, it's not the same as, say, the difference between Phoebe and Zach Wynn, who were the other candidates for the 2-year, oh God, do I get this right? Yeah, the 2-year seat in Ward 1. That's a really stark difference. I think that this difference, I think there are a number of factors that gave Kayla an edge, and that I think people will, as long as she's really representing, that she's showing up to meetings, that she's representing people, and that they're starting to see the kinds of change that they probably were in favor of anyway, say when it comes to reimagining public safety, that she shouldn't have a really difficult time winning over people who maybe supported Cynthia. The other thing that went on the other thing about this election in Ward 1 was that they weren't bashing each other. I didn't hear negative, accusations or mudslinging going on between these two. So in terms of the people who supported Cynthia and supported Kayla, I don't think there's any reason for there to be really hard feelings or animosity between them. And I think there's a big difference, although they've both been here, Kayla's been here for her entire life, as they were saying, and she's also younger, and I think it might have been, that may give her an edge, and that people are looking and are willing to say, let's listen to some new ideas and a different approach. After all, they're changing the whole way that the government's structured, so why not listen to and consider what a representative has to say?
Well, the issues going forward, particularly with the solidarity slate, now having 3 people on council, and Tiffany Kumar, somewhat aligned with the ideology.
I definitely think a lot of the solidarity slate candidates have supported advocating for things such as good cause eviction, which has been on hold here for a little while. They've also voiced support for the city joining the Emergency Tenant Protection Act, things like that. So a lot of initiatives related to housing. So, yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts about solidarity slate and their influence in terms of policy to come?
I think they've been a pretty polarizing presence in local politics. On one hand, the slate has, I think, been a big part of rallying younger people and getting them involved. I can think of several times at least where organizers associated with the solidarity slate have helped turn out tons of people to a common council meeting just to voice their opinion, demonstrate, and leave an impression on the city's electeds. But some of those tactics and some of the rhetoric from people online or in person, I know some elected officials, past and present, find unsavory. And it is interesting to have this group that is committed to voting in a block. That's been criticized fairly or unfairly, but it's something that they're sticking to. And that's meaningful to know that there's going to be 3 people that are always going to vote the same way. I mean, that is a meaningful margin on a 10-member council.
Mm-hmm. Or at least they say they are.
At least they say they are.
Right? Yeah.
Well, I think they have ruffled feathers, shaken up politics, and made their presence known. I mean, after all, Kayla Mantos is a Solidarity Slate member, and she unseated Cynthia Brock, who's been on council for almost 12 years now.
Mm-hmm. I think I'm really interested to see what happens if they really are going to push sort of legislation that has to do with rent controls, and because the rhetoric that they put out is about wealthy real estate developers and big real estate owners, and the city of Ithaca has a lot of small scale owners, people who own 1, maybe 2 buildings, maybe, fewer than 10 apartments total, or I don't know the exact numbers on this. So I think it's going to be interesting to see like what the public support and where they're going to get public support that's going to have the wherewithal, that could have influence on the members of council to vote with them who aren't part of the Solidarity Slate. Mm-hmm. And I'm also really interested to see sort of what they're going to do, or what they're going to try to do about homelessness, because allowing people to live in the jungle is not a solution to homelessness. Mm-hmm. And some of the problems that people have who are living in the jungle, some of the reasons for their homelessness go beyond poverty, and how they're going to, whether they're going to propose anything, any kind of legislation, try to enact any kind of policies, or work with or form some sort of a coalition. What they're going to do about that, I think, is something that I'm curious to see. Like, what's the thing is, like, elections are, there's some saying in politics about there's elections and then there's governing. And so I think that, they're not a majority of the council. They're 3 people. Mm-hmm. So first, they're going to have enough of a majority. And second, they're going to have ideas that we haven't already heard people talking about mm-hmm. for the past, decade or so.
There appears to be within the city the belief that it's going to be an intermunicipal cooperation in order to provide the supports that are needed. Do we think that's realistic?
If the question is it possible? Sure. I mean, the county and the city can definitely cooperate if they want to.
Well, looking at past history in terms of city-county cooperation about things, is this very likely to happen?
Again, I can't really predict if it's likely or not. There is a working group mm-hmm. that includes city and county representatives and members of the community and people who work on issues related to homelessness. And so there's absolutely an effort at forming a formal cooperation mm-hmm. And a shared sense of commitment. But the city did put down a chunk of change in the budget this year to address the jungle, bring amenities into there, mm-hmm. And I believe the figure is above $200,000. So that means something. It's sort of like. As a spectator, it seems a little bit like, I'll take one step, can you take another? I'll take one step, can you mm-hmm. take another? And still coming down to the fine details of what this agreement could look like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't know if looking at the past might not give you a very positive outlook on what could happen in that situation, but I think most candidates running for election have spoken about improving cooperation between the city, the county, and even the town. So I think going forward, that's a huge topic on everybody's mind.
I made a joke when the mayor was on the show about the cut in salary and the diminished responsibilities, and why would someone want to kind of take on the role of being a mayor? He seemed to believe that this was a great opportunity for a mayor to be able to rally the city, to be able to be a policy leader. And I'm wondering, is that an accurate assessment of a new mayor?
I mean, the way that the change in government structure from the system we used to have to a city manager system divests a lot of administrative responsibilities from the office of mayor and invests that in a city manager, someone who is staff. It is not an elected position. And the thinking is that this will allow city government to run more smoothly. That was the message that was put out. The idea is, someone who could be elected to mayor might not be a strong administrative mind, and that could affect how well the city is run or not. And now the idea is, this person, the mayor, the elected mayor, can focus more on policy and outreach, constituent communication. And that message, that idea, has definitely appealed to Rob Cantelmo, who is the mayor-elect. And I guess time will tell how effective he's able to be in that position. He won't be burdened with a full-time job, in a sense, with being the mayor of Ithaca, as it has typically been seen and how it's played out in the past. It's hard for me to say, is it going to work? I guess we just have to watch it, wait and see. A city manager still has to be hired.
It's between two final candidates too. Right?
Well,
But I should add that this model of government is at play in many municipalities.
Yeah.
And we have a proxy in the county to look towards, which is run by a unelected administrator who serves at the pleasure of the legislature, and that is I think been an influential example for the city in pursuing a city manager's government.
How about the rest of council? Do you think they will look at the mayor as the leader of policy? Do you think they will buy into that?
I think they'll look at the mayor as the main conduit to the city manager, and if they need to, the mayor will basically end up acting as the middleman between common council members and the city manager, and then delegate tasks out to department heads.
Well, talking to Rob, he sounds like he wants to be a bit more policy-oriented and not really necessarily have to deal with the day-to-day workings of the city. He saw himself as a community builder. What little we know of him, do we feel like he can fulfill that role? Celia, do you think?
I've only been around Rob a little bit. He certainly was willing, in the short time between the MOU vote didn't happen and was rescheduled, postponed. He certainly was willing to get out there and try to get people together to hear what they were saying. But he was also in campaign mode. He definitely is into policy. I don't know if it's fair to call him a policy wonk or not, but he's definitely into policy, and he's willing to dig in and take on understanding and considering, it seems, different ways of different options for getting things done. But I think, the relationship between the new mayor and the yet to be named city manager, and how the rest of city government understands who's in control there, I think is going to be really interesting to see.
There were a lot of community people coalescing around the MOU. Will that momentum keep going with council, or is it likely to fade with time?
I hope it doesn't fade with time. I'm not sure how optimistic people should be about the state passing anything to change to make changes to Cornell's tax-exempt status. I think everyone that paid attention to trying to get the governor to sign the bill to save Ithaca car share, and about how difficult that was and how long of a process that was. That took a lot of resources, and something like changing Cornell's tax-exempt status is a much bigger task.
Yeah, I question the feasibility of altering the MOU between Cornell and the city of Ithaca. I mean, politically, sure, it could happen, but it should be emphasized that there is no legal requirement for Cornell to contribute funds to the city of Ithaca. The city has the most powerful point of leverage it has is public shaming. And, you know, we saw a very active populace come out after negotiations hit a wall between the city of Ithaca and Cornell leading up to the final contract. We saw people come out and express, I think, a low boiling anger at the level of contribution that Cornell makes to the city of Ithaca and demanding it to treat its home municipality better. But I think it would be interesting for me as a journalist to cover, but it would be very interesting for me as a journalist to cover if the city's electeds pursue renegotiating that agreement, and I would be eager to see what that would look like, just as a reporter. But I don't know how realistic it is.
Yeah, like what would the strategy be?
I believe they're locked in for 15 years.
No,
Yes.
they're not.
Yeah.
They have.
No?
There's an option in there that either party can
Right.
leave
Oh,
the
but then Cornell
agreement.
won't contribute anything, potentially, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
If the city left, if the agreement were ended, then Cornell wouldn't contribute anything. I think the fact that Cornell gives so little in comparison to its fellow Ivies, in particular, well, just all of them, pretty much. And that they haven't been, that sort of the shaming that was done locally wasn't enough to, the pressure that was put on Common Council, I guess, to try to do something different wasn't enough. I mean, even the compromise that came out of moving it from 21 years or 20 years to 15 years was Cornell saying, we'll go to here. You know, they're changing and raising and going to a higher amount to 4 million instead of, what was it, 3.2 or something. That was Cornell saying, yeah, we'll go here, but we can't push more. So when, you know, if you sat in that meeting where the council finally did vote on the MOU, you know, someone was proposing an amendment, and the city attorney made it very clear. He said, if you choose that, then you're basically negating it, because Cornell has said they won't do anything, they won't agree to anything else. And yeah, it's a very interesting dynamic between, and I think that low boiling anger is also resentment. Like, is what when I was talking to people about it, was like a tremendous resentment that Cornell seemingly has so much money, has certain for-profit entities, and is not willing to do more for the city when, this is what people were saying, they easily could and not feel that. Like that was the perception and what I was hearing. So, but it's hard to see how the city would, like what leverage the city has to renegotiate that. I think right now there's a bill, I think, going into or being worked on in the state legislature that specifically targets universities that own more than a certain amount of real estate. But that bill was written specifically for targeting NYU and Columbia. And so Cornell owns how much they own in New York City compared to what Cornell owns, the value of what Cornell owns in Ithaca is much, much greater. So Cornell wouldn't be affected if that bill went through and were passed, and it really only affects two places in New York State. So that would have to be reworked to lower that number and to include Cornell. And I don't know whether, in doing that, it also would sweep up some other schools that maybe were that weren't intended, like maybe Hamilton or, Bard or whatever.
Any thoughts about a new city manager coming in 2024?
I think more than the city manager position, I'm really curious to see what kind of police chief Ithaca gets, because whoever that police chief is coming in with a lot of challenges, but also with a clear mandate to get along with and be on board with the Reimagining Public Safety program or initiative or agenda.
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry.
I mean, potentially half the Common Council could be completely new, depending on how the Ward 4 race works out between Jorge and Patrick Kuehl. But the political will for reimagining public safety, I don't have any indication that that's going to wane. In addition to the police chief, I mean, there's lots of other positions too that are going to be filled. I mean,
Oh my gosh, that's true.
Yeah.
the city attorney recently announced, Ari Levine recently announced that he was stepping down. I mean, we've already talked about the city manager. The controller is going to be retiring soon, so is the head of human resources. I mean, last year too, there were some major retirements. The head of the planning department, the city clerk, the director of sustainability, and that's only just to name a few that retired last year. So, I mean, there's just major turnover, not just on the council and in the mayor's office, but also at department heads. And it's going to be a lot of new faces.
Are we concerned at all that the city's going to stay stable, or could there really be big problems with all these new people coming in and trying to keep the ship together?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime there's big changes, people raise their eyebrows and they should pay attention. I don't have any specific indication that there's going to be a, destabilizing. But, these are the things that you watch. Okay, there's new people coming in a lot of different positions. What is that going to mean, and what does that look like?
Right. It's like, is it all of a sudden going to be a lot of other lower level or middle level people in these departments? Are they going to start retiring depending on who comes in at the head of some of these departments?
Yeah.
Is that going to change things? Is there going to be another sort of pandemic or endemic? Is something wacky going to go on with the national economy that's going to have these ripple effects that hit hard, that there's nothing that Ithaca can do that Ithaca government can really do to sort of control those in any way?
Yeah, there's a wide potential for chaos anywhere in the world today. But I
Matt.
think,
What do you know that we don't?
no,
true,
just
yeah.
look at what's going on.
Yeah, you're right.
But I think, like Jimmy said earlier, a lot of other municipalities around the country have implemented city manager forms of government. People retire. It's part of life. So it's going to be interesting to see how the city deals with all this. It's definitely a big time for transition.